Thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening for our first webinar series of the MANRRS Includes summer series that's focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the space around food, agriculture, and natural resources. Thank you all for joining us. We're joined today by our esteemed panelists, Dr. Antoine Alston of North Carolina A&T State University, Dr. Dexter Wakefield from Alcorn State University, and Ms. Taryn J. Mitchell from Taryn J. Mitchell Speaks. So you're going to be joined today by a festive panel, and I'm sure a lot of great information. And again, I will revisit you at the end of the webinar to just remind you to complete our survey and to also stay tuned for our other webinar dates that'll be coming up later this summer. And I think our president has now joined us, so perfect timing. I will transition over to him for opening remarks and to officially kick us off. Dr. Bernard. Maybe Taryn, you may want to just pick up, please.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Juneteenth celebration that we'll be spending together. The first, hopefully, of many here in the United States of America. Let me introduce to you our esteemed authors for the evening. We have Dr. Antoine Alston. Dr. Alston is a native of Rocky Mount, North Carolina, professor and associate dean for academic studies at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. Dr. Alston has a myriad of awards, but let us know that he is the first Black man, the first African-American to receive the United States Department of Agriculture's Food and Agriculture Sciences Excellence in Teaching Award. We will see why that's historic in just a moment as we move further into the discussion. With him is Dr. Dexter B. Wakefield. Dr. Wakefield from Quitman, Georgia, population 2. Dr. Wakefield went to Fort Valley State University, got his master's and doctorate degree from Purdue. And Dr. Wakefield is well known around the country for his research on the historical roles of Blacks in agriculture. This leads us to the seminal work that they have published, which is this book, The Legacy of the New Farmers of America. First of all, Dr. Alston and Dr. Wakefield, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for providing us with this opportunity today.
It's a true honor and a privilege to be with you today.
Well, you know, MANRRS is the voice that promotes academic and professional advancement for minorities in agriculture, natural resources, and related sciences. So there is no better place to platform your book. Let's get into, before we start, let's get into, both of you work in agriculture in some way, shape, form, or fashion. If you will start, Dr. Alston, how did you get into agriculture and agricultural studies?
You could say it was right in my home. My father, the late Albert Alston, was my high school agriculture education teacher and was a 1967 graduate of North Carolina A&T. And my maternal grandfather graduated from Delaware State in 1940 with a degree in dairy science. So I am a third generation 1890 HBCU agriculture major. And of course, I grew up on a small farm in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. So agriculture has been a part of my life from the very beginning.
All right. And Dr. Wakefield, you?
Well, just like Dr. Alston, my father was my high school agricultural teacher as well in Quitman, Georgia. And I tell you what got me interested in agriculture was seeing his involvement with the high school students as an agricultural teacher. And coming from a small community, everybody were family at the time. And so just to see him be father to other students really impacted me as his own son. And he's a graduate of Fort Valley State University as well, with a degree in agricultural education. Along with, I have 36 members of my family graduated from Fort Valley State University.
Wow.
So agriculture as well as academics from pretty high in my family. And so that was one of the reasons why I got into agriculture education, because, you know, we following our father's footsteps. And it was great to meet a guy like Dr. Alston, who, you know, he and I have the same pathways. And that's how we became good buddies as well as frat brothers.
Well, that's amazing, because it also shows here at Father's Day the influence that fathers can have in setting a path for your life. So that is a timely thing.
And well, both of us also, our children are also currently at 1890 land grants as well. My daughter is our fourth generation ag major. She's a USD 1890 scholar, and Dr. Wakefield can tell you about his children, like my godchildren.
Oh yeah, my daughter is at Tuskegee University majoring in animal science, and she was on the dean's list this semester. And my son is a 1890 scholar at Alcorn State University in agriculture, business, and economics.
Amazing, amazing. So with that kind of shared history and legacy, how did you all meet up and even discuss the New Farmers of America? And for those who are watching, please explain exactly what the New Farmers of America was and why we're talking about it today.
Well, Dr. Wakefield, why don't you kick it off since you did your dissertation on that?
Oh, I wanted you to, because I love to hear your story, how we met. Dr. Alston and I, we met actually at a MANRRS conference many years ago, way back in 97, 98, something like that, isn't it, Dr. Alston? 98. We met at a MANRRS conference. And so in our discussions, we found out we had so much commonality with one another. And then we started talking about history of agriculture. And then Dr. Alston said, hey, you know what? We have the NFA archives. It's in a closet at North Carolina A&T, and nobody's really touched it too much except for a guy by the name of Dr. A.P. Bell. He said, why don't you come up here and check us out? And then I said, you know what? I am going to do that. And so I got a flight and flew to North Carolina A&T, and then Dr. Alston, Dr. A.P. Bell, and Dr. Chastity Warren, English, they all took me around the NFA archive, and I said, you know what, we got to do something with this. And I said, this word needs to get put out. And so that led me to start my thesis as an undergraduate at Purdue University. I had finally found my niche. So that's what kicked it off all the way to my PhD, where I continue to work. But that's how I initially started the conversation with Dr. Alston.
And like Dr. Wakefield said, both of us were in our PhD programs, and I was at Iowa State. And both of our followers were NFA members, and that really sparked a conversation with us. And Dr. A.P. Bell, who he talked about, Dr. Bell was the chairman of agricultural education at A&T for over 40 years and was a past ag teacher himself and maintained the archives for all those years. And so it was really important for us to make sure that we get that Black history out there, because if we don't tell it, somebody else will, and they'll tell a different story.
So in August of 1935, you had some young men who met on the campus of Tuskegee University. Now, I have a question. Was the Future Farmers of America already an established organization at this time?
Yes, the Future Farmers of America started in the late 20s, really out of Kansas City, Missouri, as a national organization. And the interesting thing about the FFA was, unlike the NFA, the FFA actually started out as a national organization and then formed as state, regional, local chapters, where the NFA was the opposite. It actually started with regional, state associations, and then formed a national state later on in 1935. So it went the opposite way, but yes, it was existing.
So why did these Black men, if the FFA was already there and established, why did these Black men know that they needed to come together with their own coalition to put their mark on agriculture?
I'm going to let Dr. Alston come at this question from the Plessy versus Ferguson Act, because everything that contributed to the creation of the New Farmers of America had to do with the time of segregation in our country, where separate was not equal. So Dr. Alston, I'm gonna let you start on that one.
So when the Plessy versus Ferguson court case of 1896, 1897, which of course dealt with public accommodations in the state of Louisiana, a gentleman sued for accommodations on a public train. That led, of course, like Dr. Wakefield, to the separate but equal doctrine that would dictate how the public facilities across the southern United States would be ran really until the middle of the 20th century. And that also impacted public school education. And like Dr. Wakefield said, one of the things that it had the separate part, but it's the equal we were still waiting on to this
Right.
day. And so a gentleman by the name of Dr. H.O. Sargent, who served as the special agent, agent for what they call special groups, which at that time the terminology was Negroes, Mexicans, and Indians. He was in the U.S. Office of Education, which was in the Department of the U.S. Office of Education, Health, and Human Welfare. He approached Professor Gw Owens at Virginia State, who was the head Negro vocational ag teacher trainer there, and said that the time was right to start a similar organization, just as they had done for the the Future Farmers of Virginia, which was the forerunner to the Future Farmers of America. And that really is how it got kicked off. And I'll pass over to Dr. Wakefield from there.
Okay, so at that point, the New Farmers of America started growing pretty big. It started with about 18 chapters and 400 members in Virginia. And then from that point, it became in May 1927, there was a rally at Virginia State College to try to have discussions in terms of how can we put together an organization for Black males now. So you have to remember back in those days, whenever we talk about numbers, and you're going to hear several numbers in terms of how many members were involved with New Farmers of America. But at the time, we were only focusing on men. And so this organization decided in 1935 to get together and establish a national organization. And this national organization was comprised of 3 sections. The 3 sections that were in the United States was called the Washington section, the Almoth. When you think of Almoth, it's Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas, because we're using those acronyms. And then the H.O. Sargent, or the Sargent sections. So that's a quick, brief history of how they established these in states. So in the states were put in the sections where you had at its peak 55,000 students who became a part of the national organization.
And let me also mention that Professor Gw Owens, one historical fact that you might want to know about him, he was the first Black graduate of Kansas State University in 1899. His first job was at Tuskegee University, where he was hired by Booker T. Washington to run their dairy herd. And his boss, who was over the Agricultural Experiment Station, who was also the keynote speaker at the first National Convention, was none other than the great Dr. George Washington Carver, my fellow Iowa State grad, and our frat brother, member of Phi Beta Sigma.
Listen, when I read this book and I saw Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver, I was like, wait a minute. Because I didn't understand why I did not know this history. I did not understand why I had never heard this. But let's get back to the how this was created. So they created an organization for young men focusing on agricultural education, right? And I mean agricultural education in all ways. For those of you who are interested in buying the book, you'll be able to see pictures where these young men were doing forestry, where they were doing deep sea fishing. So talk to me a little bit about how the organization functioned so that people would actually be attracted to it. Tell me about the summer program, even the camp that was down in Onslow County in North Carolina. Tell us a little bit about that.
Let me get a quick viewpoint of it, Dr. Alston, which will lead into yours. And this comes directly from my dissertation and my thesis. And these are the words from actual NFA members back in those days. They talked about how the NFA was better than playing football back in those days, because you got all the Black males together where they would meet together at camps. They would go and participate in competition, learn leadership development, learn career success factors, but it all revolved around that Black male teacher during the times when Black males were prominent in agriculture and agricultural education. So I was listening to Dr. Alston's dad talk to me, his stepfather talked to me, former NFA members talked to me, and talked to me about all the great experiences they had, which led them into the organization. And so this is a precursor to what Dr. Alston is going to tell you.
And you have to remember, agricultural education is the founding branch of what we used to call vocational education, which also includes home economics, which you now call family and consumer science. And the whole purpose of vocational education was to train individuals to go out once they leave high school into an occupation to go into entrepreneurship. And so in the agricultural education program, students took classes in animal science, plant science, soil science, agribusiness. Some of the contest programs that the NFA had, which expanded which was really designed to help the students to practice in a competitive format the skills learned in their classroom. They had everything from farm electrification, poultry judging, you had the land judging competitions, livestock, a variety of things, and quartet competition, which is a whole nother, which emphasized the singing of Negro spirituals. And of course, Dr. Wakefield can sing. I can't sing. I'll run you off of this webinar. But the whole structure of the NFA was designed, like Dr. Wakefield said, to produce future agricultural leaders. And as far as the camping program you were talking about, just like FFA, most NFA state associations had a state camp for students during the summer to come and have recreation, which was one of the goals, if you will, one of the stated goals of the NFA was recreation. And so to develop the whole student, if you will. And so in also County, North Carolina, we had the SB Simmons Camp, which was named after the longtime executive secretary and treasurer of the NFA, SB Simmons, who was also the head ag education, as they say, Negro teacher trainer in North Carolina. And Dr. Wakefield can talk about the camp they had in Georgia as well, if you would like to as well.
Yeah, we had a camp known as Camp John Hope, which is right outside of Fort Valley State University. And what's amazing about that camp, I attended that camp since I was a baby, all the way up till I graduated from high school. And so the rich history that was there was phenomenal. And so, and even thinking about that, one of the things that a lot of the former NFA members used to always talk about when they talk about the NFA was it kept Black young men out of trouble, because they had opportunity to participate in so many different sports and activities. They had mentors there. They had opportunities to win awards and recognition. And the more you were involved, the less trouble you got into. So many of those things were lost later on in the history of the NFA at the conclusion of the organization.
And one of the things I would also interject in here as well, Dr. Wakefield alluded to, many Black youth went on to college because of their ag teaching, even if they didn't major in agriculture. I remember my dad's side came from sharecropping, and Dad often tells a story that in the spring of 1962, his ag teacher came while he was actually literally plowing a field with a mule and said, "Son, what are you doing after you graduate high school?" He said, "I guess I'll be in the same field where you see me." He said, "No, son, you're going to Greensboro, you're going to college." And so that was just an example of the many stories that you can find. And my maternal grandfather was an NFA member as well, but his family actually had their own farm. So my family represents the dual society or dual society. We had both our farm, we had the college educated side as well as the sharecropping side, but all of them got a college education.
Now, with this being said, we are talking about something that is deeply entrenched now. We're talking about 30 years of an entrenched organization, right? So we're talking about something that has impacted and affected the culture that we bring. Now, I want to ask you something before we get into how we were absorbed. Who was funding the NFA? Where did the money come from? Was this a government-funded organization? How did that work?
Okay, so the U.S. Office of Education provided the funding for the NFA. And what was interesting was when it was first founded, the NFA operated outside the auspices of the U.S. Office of Education's Ag Education branch. And it did this for its first couple of years of existence. But as history has always proven, anytime you have something that's Black owned or Black operated, society does not like that. And so eventually what happened was at a meeting at I believe it was the 7th National Convention down in Tallahassee, Florida, which of course is what Florida A&M is, and it actually wasn't Florida A&M. The head advisors, the adult advisors were basically forced to vote for the NFA to come up under the auspices of the U.S. Office of Education, or their funds will be cut off, which the funds were used for advisor travel, national convention running, and associations. the federal government really controlled the purse strings, not only the NFA, but the FFA too, because these were organizations that have federal charters and were federally supported.
Okay.
Yes, and that's the
Go right
major
ahead.
part of it too, because the federal government actually led toward the absorption of the organization. And it was something that it was uncontrollable at the time because the federal government had a major role in this absorption.
Well, based on what I was reading in your book, the federal government pretty much held both organizations hostage. They said, if you don't merge these two organizations, we will withhold the funding. And that's why I was wondering how much of the funding for the NFA was actually coming from the government, because we do know separate and equal was never the same. So when I read about the push to withhold funding if there was no merger, I thought, well, how much money were we talking? I'm sure that the USDA wasn't giving the NFA as much money as they were giving to the FFA.
No, they would not give as much money, but let me say this as related to money, which is this whole thing of control. You probably read in the book that one of the interesting things was that the U.S. Office of Education, the chief of the Ag Ed branch, did not want the NFA to be totally ran by its adult. You know, you had your student national officers, but you also had your adult officers. So instead of letting the Black leadership totally run the organization, he took the administrative advisor for the NFA, also served in the same capacity with the FFA. So you had a white male from the FFA in charge of also administratively of the NFA, even though he didn't ever come to any meetings. And the crazy part about this is that he had less education than many of the adult NFA officers. You had people who NFA officers that had PhDs from Cornell, Purdue, Ohio State, because most of them had to go to the Midwest and Northeast to get their PhD. Can you imagine telling somebody from an Ivy League school like Cornell, that's a graduate of Ivy League school, that you're not smart enough to run your own organization? This is how ridiculous this was at the time.
Yes,
it may have been ridiculous, but you said, can we imagine? Yes, we can imagine, because that was and in some spaces still is life in America.
Mm-hmm. And to add on to that very briefly, even though the federal government was providing dollars for the support NFA chapters, many of the chapters were self-sustaining based on their fundraising on the activity that they received, and a lot of the competition and things that they participated in. So federal government provided the same type of federal support to everyone else at that level, at a specific level we're talking about. But at the same time, the Black schools and the NFA were able to manage by being creative with the funding that they received.
I saw you had the travel with the quartets. You had it was almost like a fair-like thing. I saw calves and chickens and the blue ribbons, and I thought, man, this is really something. As we move into the next phase, where we're going to talk about this merger of the FFA and the NFA, we want to encourage anyone who is currently watching the broadcast to please post any questions that you have for Dr. Alston and Dr. Wakefield in the chat. Please post any questions that you may have about the New Farmers of America and the legacy that we're discussing in the chat. Now, they're told, both organizations are told, that you all must merge and become one, otherwise the funding will be withheld. There's a big fallout in the NFA because you had some who I'm sure were saying, this is a mistake. We shouldn't do this. This is not going to work. And then you had some say, well, if 1964 Civil Rights Act passed, I'm sure that we're going to have some protection. I can almost see both of those camps as like it's today. I can almost see how that went down. But as you said, there was no choice. So they merge. And immediately, the first thing that I saw was that the archive was given from the NFA to the FFA. And I thought, when I read it, because I'm reading this like a novel, I said, oh, that's a mistake. And then I hear you, Dr. Alston, saying that the archive is in the closet. So before we get there, tell me what happens. You have this merger. So the NFA is phased out. The name no longer even exists. So everyone who is in any form of agricultural education in the United States of America is now harbored under the Future Farmers of America. Everyone is now FFA. Now, the NFA had jackets, they had blazers, they had posters, they had everything. And now all of that is gone. And what happens?
Let me lead you into that, Dr. Alston. If you think back to Brown versus Board of Topeka County, that's when separate but equal was considered unconstitutional. And all of that led into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed by President Johnson during that time. What many people, if you take yourself back and think about what's going on during that time, there were actually a lot of people. It was many admirable discussions between the FFA and the NFA officers, and mostly it was national officers at the time who was doing these discussions. There were good talks, about 9 years worth of talks prior to the absorption in the rooms. Everybody thought that they was coming out with an equal amount of self-satisfaction with each organization if it just so happened to merge. And if anyone had the opportunity to look at my dissertation, you would see there were 12 bullet points. This is not the book. There's still a lot of other stuff that could very easily go into the book. But there were 12 bullet points that the national officers presented to the FFA and said, you know what, we really like what you all are talking about, but can we get this? And that was like the change of the FFA to the Future Farmers of Agriculturalists. It was all different types of things. Can we have a national officer in a leadership role? There were about 12 different things in that organization. But then we led into 1964. Now, everybody think about what was going on during the civil rights time, during this passage of that act. So that's going to lead into what Dr. Alston is going to say with this part.
So, as you know, with a merger implies that both organizations still maintain some semblance of their existence. But as we like to say, I had somebody call me recently and say, well, should we say merger or should we say absorption? I say, well, do you want to be politically correct or historically accurate? And so with the absorption of the organization, you lost all Black leadership. One of the things that they wanted to do, these points that Dr. Wakefield was talking about, one of the things that came out, the adult leaders wanted to have at least one, if they said one Negro adult leader to be on the national staff at the U.S. Office of Education, which did not happen. They want to have one on the National FFA Board of Directors, which didn't happen. So eventually what happened was at the local level, where you had these Black ag programs and white ag programs, when they consolidated, the Black ag program was basically thrown away. And many times the Black ag teacher lost their job, even if they were more qualified than the white ag teacher. Okay, so you lost Black teachers over time, which led to less Black males being enrolled in these programs, which led to less Blacks going to college to major in agriculture. Okay, well, see, one of the things there was a domino effect, because it was your secondary ag teachers who were graduates of your 1890 land grants with your historic Black ag colleges like Fort Valley, Tuskegee, A&T, Prairie View, Virginia State, Florida A&M, these schools, Maryland Shore, Alabama A&M, et cetera, that led to these graduates promoted agricultural science as a career option, which in turn promoted these folks to go to college. Well, when you lost those Black ag teachers like Dr. Wakefield, those leaders in the community, you lost that vessel that encouraged Blacks to go into ag. So the ultimate impact, we lost Black, the Black prominence and Black enrollment in agriculture, which is still felt to this day, which of course MANRRS is picking up, that mantle and carrying it on, but it was a major blow.
You take away the Black males, you take away role models, you take away mentors, you take away father figures to kids who don't have those type of things. And think about what was going on in '64 when men had to leave home to find a decent job and a decent employment, and to have these technical skills. So they decided, instead of teach, I'm going to use my technical skills and go out there and try to support my family. But at the same time, it breaks down the structure of the Black male family, because the Black male is no longer around, which has a ripple effect to, I would say, even to what's going on today. With the 60s had a lot to do with that.
And you know, and I never had the honor of meeting Dr. Wakefield's father, but I know Dr. Wakefield's father was just like my dad. It was many times I would come home and see other kids eating in my home or around our house, because my dad was like a surrogate parent to other. You know, my dad was the one that was a teacher that could get along with the student when nobody else could. And I know Mr. Wakefield was probably the same way, you know, which is what most Black teachers, you know, did.
Both my parents were teachers. And so I tell people all the time, you know, my mother would open the door and yell upstairs and say, Taryn, get the trundle ready. And I knew someone from school was coming to stay with us for a while. And then my parents would go to the house the next day and they would try to negotiate whatever needed to be fixed for the student to be able to go back home. So I have lived that life. I know how that works. Tell me this. When MANRRS, before MANRRS, of course, was created, when the NFA was absorbed, because we are not calling it a merger, when they were absorbed within the FFA, you all project that there were approximately 58,000 agricultural students at that time that were members of the NFA alone.
Yes.
Well,
if
actually,
you had to go right ahead.
Actually, records show that it was as high as 65,000 at its highest peak. So it was quite a bit of students that were involved in the merger. Only during the time of the merger was 55,000.
So if we take from 1965 and let's just take a 15-year history, let's just take a 15-year period. By 1980, how many agricultural students had been lost that were Black?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I don't know the exact number at that time, but I can tell you this. In the national FFA demographic numbers as of last year, it was about 40,000 African Americans, and that's actually been an increase. So if I had to take a guess, I would say probably around the 80s, it was probably about mid-30s probably. You lost a lot of Blacks that were in it. Let me put it to you this way. In North Carolina, when my dad started teaching ag in 1967, there were almost 300 Black ag teachers in this state. In North Carolina today, we have less than 40 Black ag teachers in this state. And we probably are the highest among, Georgia might be the one right behind us, maybe, you know, it's not many. It's not many.
Yeah, and my dad, when he started teaching in the 60s, I remember him talking about having nearly 100 guys at the meetings that he can talk to back in those days. But I want you to really think about that statistic that Dr. Alston just mentioned. He mentioned that there are 40,000 African Americans. Remember, African Americans involved in the FFA, National FFA right now. 40,000 today. There were 58,000 Black men alone back in the 60s. We're not even talking about women. We're talking about today, 40,000. So that shows you the major impact. So we don't have data to say how many are men or women, but I know that's easy to get. That's in there right now, but there's only 40,000 African Americans in an organization of nearly 800,000 today.
So historically, what was found in the FFA that ran people off, that wasn't welcoming people in? What happened in the FFA that we could not find a home?
Well, in the FFA, it was the racism. The racism, you had teachers who had what I call, for the lack of a better word, that good old boy mentality, who did not want Black males in their programs, who had their way of thinking. They were raised, remember, this was primarily in the, see, here's the thing. Let me just say one thing. You actually had Black people who were in the FFA. This is the thing I want to say. The FFA had Black members in other states like California and other places, but it was in the Southern United States where the segregation was. And so when you had these Black students going in, and depending on, now you had some white teachers that welcomed them with open arms, but that was not everybody. And so you had an atmosphere that was not welcoming, very discouraging. And so it led a lot of these students to not want to go into agriculture. And that's why to this day, it's still hard to recruit African Americans into agriculture because they don't understand agriculture is science, it's business, it's technology. So it was really that whole atmosphere of racism that they felt from those teachers. And Dr. you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I would like to make sure that we make this clear. I would like to separate the National FFA from the individuals involved with the FFA. The National FFA, the way it's established, is for success for every student that's involved in the organization. But that doesn't say that, you know, the people who are leaders are doing the right thing, such as your teachers and such as even schools and universities in terms of making it an inclusive environment for all students. So the model is there. So the model never changed with the FFA and the as well as the NFA, but the people changed, which made it harder for underrepresented populations to succeed in an organization of with did not take the academic progression of Black individuals very highly.
And let me also insert there. Not only did you have NFA, but you also had in home economics, where you have Future Homemakers of America for white females.
Right.
The Black female organization was the New Homemakers of America. And you had Black 4-H, you had white 4-H. So you had a separate but equal, well, like here again, we said it was separate, but it sure wasn't equal.
Sure wasn't equal.
So we just want to mention that. I mean, I wish I could find an NHA because that would be a whole nother book, you know.
Well, tell me something. There is a question. Is the archive of the NFA digitized?
So North Carolina A&T, so our third author on the book, Professor Netta Cox, who is the ag librarian and liaison at North Carolina A&T, Ms. Cox and myself received a grant of almost $400,000 from the National FFA organization earlier this year. And this is a 4-year grant to digitize the the NFA collection. And we're going to hire a digital librarian. We're going to have graduate students involved. Dr. Wakefield's going to be involved. And so this will eventually be digitized. It's a long-term project, but you're talking about thousands, and I do mean thousands of pages of documents. Let me give you one example. We found a letter. I don't even know if I told Dr. Wakefield this yet. We actually found a letter in the NFA archives about 4 months ago, written to our president at that time from Simon Haley. Now you probably say, who is Simon Haley? That was Alex Haley's father, Alex Haley, who wrote Roots.
Wow.
Simon Haley was a 1919 graduate of North Carolina A&T with a BS in agriculture education. So that was all mixed into our archive. So, I mean, there are several things that we run across in this collection all the time. So, hey, yeah.
Dr. Alston, let me just say something about that. Alex Haley went to Alcorn.
Oh, wow. Listen,
small world.
as we are talking about North Carolina A&T State University, Alcorn State University, Fort Valley State University, there is a question in the chat. And the question is, how did this absorption or merger affect the 1890 land grant institutions?
But if you want to take that one.
Oh man, so the way it affected the 1890 institution as a whole, let's just look at the 1890s as itself. Those are your historical Black colleges and universities. Most of your NFA chapters fed these universities, the 1890 HBCUs. So when students graduate from high school, majority of the time, those kids were provided opportunities to go to 1890s when they were not provided opportunities to go to 1862. Now, we were free and we were equal, but when it was time for admission, we were not given the opportunity to do that. So it impacted, when you started closing chapter of organizations like the NFA, it goes back to what we talked about. You stop having individuals sending kids and teaching kids about the structure of HBCUs at that time. So we lost a whole lot with our role models and our leadership in terms of pushing kids to go to 1890 institutions. And so it had so many different adverse effects on those. I can just name a couple of them, but Dr. Alston may give you a couple more.
I can just tell you, looking at our enrollment, you know, when you're looking at, let me give you an example. You're talking about Blacks going into agriculture. Let's take animal science, for example. You know, at one time, Tuskegee produces 75% of African-American veterinarians in the United States, okay? If you look at our 1890 ag programs, we have to really recruit to get our students into these programs. I mean, it is a struggle because you have to let individuals know about the opportunities that are available to them.
But well, not just that, but also the 1890 office does not make it easy. Now, let me just be honest, because my daughter was looking to go to school, and we filled out that 18. First of all, the application is still paper. It's about 12 pages long, and then you have to send it to the different schools, and then you don't get any response of whether or not they have received it. And this is only if the actual deadline is posted at the 1890 office at the USDA, which for the last 2 years it had not been. They do not make it easy to get those opportunities, even though they have expanded the width and the breadth of majors that can apply for the funds, but they don't make it easy.
Well, you bring up a good point there, because there's a lot of money at the HBCU in terms of scholarships and opportunities. But we have to do a better job of sending that information out, and not always just dependent on websites and emails and those type of things. We got to be out there in the fields like the old teachers of the past, letting students know, going to high school and say, hey, you know, we have these dollars available. And you know, we tell kids, just in case you don't get it the first time, don't give up. You know, my son tried twice for the 1890s, and he ended up getting it the third time. And so he's very excited about that. So we have to make sure that we are providing this information, and make sure you stay on your 1890 liaisons too. I wanted to throw that in there. If you're not familiar with that, if you're on this phone call today, on this email, you contact that liaison directly, and don't just depend on your paperwork.
And also, let me add to that. I'm going to tell you one of the biggest impediments we have was not only 1890 land grants, but all HBCUs, is high school guidance counselors. I cannot tell you the number of guidance counselors that will tell a child, "Oh, you sure you don't really want to go to that Black college? I mean, are you sure you want?" Even with my father being my high school ag teacher, my dad had to tell my guidance counselor, "No, my son is going to A&T." And I had a full ride to NC State, Clemson, Virginia Tech, and A&T. Well, my dad told my counselor he will be going to Aggie-Lane. And the thing is, if you don't have those advocates at the high school level, those kids, I mean, I can't tell you the number of African-American families I run into. And it's a shame when I have to convince that African-American kid that a Black college is where they need to be, because somebody has told them that if it's not a PWI, it's not the way to go.
But Dr. Alston, I think that one of the things that we're going to have to be honest about at the post-secondary level is that the educational model has changed. So when you talk about that, you talk as if most of these students who are in high school are actually being guided by a guidance counselor. That is no longer happening.
Right, exactly.
That is no longer happening. And so, whereas you would go into an office and you would see the different posters or the different flags that would be up, most of them only see their guidance counselor literally at the beginning of the year in August when they're setting their schedules. They might as well just be schedulers these days. We have to look at the fact that the educational model from high school to college has changed, but there is a disconnect there, because what the college thinks is happening prior to is no longer happening.
And that's why you have to go ahead. No,
yeah, and another thing too, we have to grow our own, because there are very few Black. I'm trying to be real technical with this, because you get in trouble saying some of this stuff. But we're not promoting our students to go into the agricultural arena all the way up to the PhD program. And so we're losing domestic, I'm gonna say it like this, domestic diversity at our HBCUs. And sometimes, based on cultural differences, not everyone understand, the importance of having those domestic mentors that you can relate to at our universities to help these kids. And when you start losing that, because we don't have any more Black PhDs or so forth going through the rigor of academics, now you're starting to lose a lot of what the HBCU were designed and created for.
And this goes back to NFA and the legacy that it left, because most of my professors I had, when I first came to A&T, like my dad's generation, they were former NFA members, and they had Black teachers that encouraged them to go on. And they, like Dr. Wakefield said, they went on to get their terminal degrees and they came back. But now, and when my students that I send off for terminal degrees, it's hard. I mean, of course, you compete with the industry. Obviously, industries are big, but academia, when our PWIs are paying more money, the compensation, it's hard to compete with that. And that whole separate but equal. If you look at our budget, and our public say, I mean, this is not anything new. If you look at the compensation of a professor at A&T versus NC State, or where Dr. Wakefield's in Alcorn versus Mississippi State, Prairie View versus Texas A&M, separate but equal is still real. Please understand.
Listen, have they finished the lawsuit in Maryland? Even though they have gotten the rights to access that money, they don't have that money. And you see what has happened in Texas. Texas historically underfunded its HBCUs, and since it has started giving those monies, I mean, you look at a Prairie View A&M and how it's been able to expand just from the monies that it had been underfunded for decades. So that is a very real point. But the point that I think is even more salient is, was there a separate but equal within the FFA?
Well, officially, the FFA, like Dr. Wakefield was saying, officially at the national level, the FFA never, in their charter, they never had segregation in their charter. It was in the Southern United States that was chosen by the state level. That was a Southern thing. And that's why I was always interested when my colleagues from outside the South come here and they hear this. I mean, it's almost like they say they're in another world. They can't even grasp, that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
As an African-American male, I received my PhD when I was 24. And I can't tell you the number of times I could walk into meetings and people would look at me like, what's that so-and-so doing here? Or how dare I open my mouth? How dare I have an opinion? Because I'm not supposed to have an, and I'll just say this, I'm going to finish on this one. I can tell you, Dr. Wakefield and I have been in the meetings, and Dr. Wakefield is one of my best friends. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, Dexter, how you doing? Now, I am 5'6", maybe. Dr. Wakefield, we about 6'2", we about 6'2",
6'4".
Y'all look alike.
Yeah. I mean, they call me, I'm like, now, I would love to have Dr. Wakefield's height. Oh, I would love that. But that's not going to happen, okay? But that just shows you the mentality of some of the people that we deal with, because let me finish by saying this. Native-born African-American males and females, I don't even think there's 50 of us nationally with PhDs in agricultural science. If I look across the whole U.S., native-born African-Americans with PhDs in agricultural sciences, I don't even think there's 50 of us. And that goes back to the NFA.
So what is it about agriculture that is not reaching our young people? Is it that when we hear agriculture, we only think farming? Is it that we hear agriculture and we're not expanding it to textiles, animal science, forestry, soil science? Like, there's so much that's in even computer science. 1890 gives a scholarship for computer science as a part of agriculture. Mm-hmm. I know that I looked and saw that the tractor that nobody has to man because it's fully automated with computers. Somebody has to be able to program them. So that means that there is a space for STEM within agriculture. But what is it? What is the disconnect?
I think it's the simple notion. I think you answered the question a few minutes ago, but basically it's the education behind the way we inform our students, our Black kids, our underrepresented kids about the career opportunities out there. Because if you look at it in a whole, the amount of students that are trying to go into these career pathways are small. And the blacks that are in high schools, most of the time, many of us are taught not to go into agriculture if you want a good job, because people are uneducated about the career opportunities that are available in agriculture. So that's why you have such a large amount of students who are unaware of the career opportunities in agriculture. But what's catchy right now, and this is going to help agriculture out a whole lot, is that term STEM, because STEM actually brings in the experiential parts of what we're doing in our classrooms, and it could help kids link agricultural career pathways with a scientific or mechanical or a technical type of pathway.
That's
So
a
they are
perfect
available,
segue.
yes.
That's a perfect segue, because what we did not we haven't honed in on. If you had the NFA that was absorbed by the FFA, how do we get to MANRRS?
Well, let me say this about MANRRS and why MANRRS is important. Agriculture is so important to our country, and we were talking about STEM and the need for organizations like MANRRS to develop these leaders. According to the UN Food and Ag Organization, we're going to have about almost 10 billion people on this earth by 2050. They're saying in order for us to keep pace with this population growth, we're going to have to grow more food in the next 30 years than we have in the previous 10,000 years combined. Now, how are we going to do that? We've got to have a diversity of representation in the agricultural sciences. If you look, research shows you in corporate America, they have what's called innovation dollars. And innovation dollars are basically dollars that come about from new products that have been developed. Well, how do they do that? It has been shown that companies that have higher levels of diversity in their executive level management and in their R&D departments, these are companies that are cutting edge. For example, PepsiCo, and this is an older model, but PepsiCo, you've heard of Mountain Dew Code Red. Did you know that was marketed towards African-American population?
Yes.
You know, wasabi flavored Doritos.
Red Pop, that's us. Red Pop is us all day.
All day. But the point we're making is that because of the need to diversify and to serve a increasingly demographically and more brown society, it is imperative that you have organizations like a MANRRS to produce these future ag leaders. When I recruit, I always tell people that agriculture is the science, technology, engineering, and math of mankind's human survival. The world's largest industry. 40% of our global workforce is connected to agriculture. 23 million people in the U.S., our country's largest industry. Here in North Carolina alone, agriculture is our state's largest industry, $95 billion of industry. If you take our state's next two largest industries, military and tourism, I mean, they don't add up to the dollar value of ag. The opportunities are there, but like Dr. Wakefield said, we've got to promote agricultural literacy with our people.
I wouldn't be where I'm at today without MANRRS. I tell everybody that without MANRRS, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at today, because everything that I contributed to, as far as friendships, as far as connections and career pathways, had to do with me coming into MANRRS many years ago.
Well, how did MANRRS, how was MANRRS created? And I'll let you all answer that, but I wanted to hone in on something that you said, Dr. Alston. The institution that you work for, North Carolina A&T State University, is known for engineering, but the agricultural department brings in way more money than the engineering school. But most people don't know that.
Well, and that's because of African American, and like Dr. Wakefield said, you know, I'm not afraid to say this. That gets down to politics too, you know, because engineering is more, quote, popular in African American population.
It's not sexy. Agriculture is not sexy.
Exactly. You know, for example, if I told a kid, I want you to major ag engineering, but if I said, I want you to major biological engineering, I like that. Well, guess what? It's the same major. They don't know that. You know what I'm saying? It's a play on the words. But let me pass over to Dr. Wakefield. You were talking about the founding of MANRRS. I know Dr. Wakefield can get that history better than I can. And look, as a past national president.
Sir.
Hey, you said enough, Dr. Alston. I can't top that one. You said enough.
So we have the FFA, and we know that from 1965 until when was MANRRS created?
I think it was during the time, because I remember I was in college during 86, 88, and I think MANRRS were created around the 88 time, because it was they had one of their meetings at Fort Valley State University, like the second year that it was created. It was initiated with Michigan State and Penn State with a group of students getting together, trying to start an organization that would assist industry with employment opportunities for Black students. And so it ended up growing and growing from that point back in the 80s. And so from that point, it has grown phenomenally. I remember it being, when I first got in, all the way to now, it's just been an amazing change in the organization. It has bounced back and forth. I've seen it through the times where we used to meet at all the HBCU schools back in the past. And then the industry became much, much more involved. And then we started developing relationship with industries. I've seen major companies come. I've seen major companies go. I've seen opportunities here left and right for our students. So MANRRS has been around since the late 80s, historically, yes.
Okay. And what we want to know moving forward, first of all, anyone who does not have this book, I am going to, as they say in the literary industry, I'm going to hawk this book for them. The Legacy of the New Farmers of America. Listen, I got the book and I was immediately entranced. We are talking about no less than 45 to 50 pages just with pictures. And I mean, when I was so jealous when I saw the deep sea fishing boat. I was like, I needed that. I have a little garden outside that, when I'm feeling myself, I call it a farm. And I said, I wanted to be a part of something like this. And I think that there is a place for all of us to understand this history. And there's also a place for us to understand why we need never to repeat it. Oftentimes we think that our ice is not cold enough, and we have to be reminded over and over that, the freezing point is the same no matter who is holding the refrigeration tool. The freezing point does not change. There are some questions, and one of them deals with recreation. And the question was, if recreation was such a big part of the NFA and it was such a huge recruiting piece, how can we get back to quote unquote recreation to bring students into agriculture? Is there something that MANRRS does in that vein?
Well, there's no magic formula for that. It usually depends on the teacher. It depends on the group, the organizations. Because if you think about recreation, I can think about different MANRRS organizations. I'm gonna throw a plug out there for University of Kentucky. When I visited that school, those students there, and this is the MANRRS organization, they work hard, but they also play hard, which means that there's a relationship between the national organization, the school organization, as well as the students, where the teacher is showing the students that there is a relationship here. And so when you're talking about recreation, it depends on your organization, your advisors, and hey, you can go independent if you want to come to a MANRRS organization if you can't find something that you like in your area. So I would not limit myself to just the recreation part, because if you come to the MANRRS conference, it's going to be recreation, but you're also going to work too. You got to do your homework. So it's not like it was in the past. You can still go to summer camps, but it's not like it was in the past.
Very good. Well, Dr. Alston and Dr. Wakefield, give us your closing remarks. I have enjoyed this historical walk down memory lane, and you all have really educated me. I have read this book last week, and I literally could not fathom that I had never heard of the New Farmers of America. So give us your final thoughts as we wind this talk down.
I'll just say it's very important that as our country and our global society becomes more diverse, then the agriculture industry mirrors that in order to feed a growing population and to take care of our environment. And so organizations like MANRRS and the legacy that the New Farmers of America has left us with, it's important that we continue to promote and develop future agricultural leaders with not only the African-American community, more broadly.
And I would like to basically say, you're not too young and you're not too old to be actively involved in your legislative discussions referencing equitable funding of our colleges and universities. For everyone out there, you have a voice. You have a voice, because if you're not there talking to your legislators and senators, then who do we have fighting for us? So I'm going to ask you to just make sure that when these opportunities are available, these funds could help us and as well as help you, but you have to be a voice in terms of the progression of these unequitable treatments at these HBCUs.
Well, this has been a rousing conversation. I have enjoyed every bit of it. I'm going to turn this back over to the MANRRS officers and staff so that they can take us further into the evening. I will encourage everyone across all of the large platforms, that is your big box stores, Barnes and Nobles, that's your Amazon. Please pick up this book. Please help Dr. Alston and Dr. Wakefield to get this information out, because everyone needs to know about the legacy of the New Farmers of America. And with that, thank you, gentlemen, for talking with me this evening, and hopefully someone got something good out of this to move into the future. And Ebony, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for that great presentation. Thank you, Taryn, for moderating such a great session. I was able to take so much from it. And I will actually turn it over to Dr. Marcus Bernard, MANRRS 22, National President for 22-23. Marcus.
Yes, thank you so much. I have a few technical difficulties, but I'm here. This was an absolutely amazing conversation. I know that everyone listening definitely learned why NFA is so important and why MANRRS is so important. So to Dr. Alston, thank you. Dr. Wakefield, thank you. Ms. Mitchell, we really appreciate you facilitating this conversation. And with that, we can close it out, Ebony.
Thank you. And as a quick reminder, Dwayne, can you actually show the slides? We wanted to just make sure we can have the audience preview those before we exit out. But as a reminder, if you all will please just complete the survey. This will help us develop future topics for discussion, as well as get your feedback on how we can make these better. So again, thank you. Please save the date for our next webinars. You can see them coming up July 21st and August the 18th. Please save those. Please save the date for our MANRRS cluster meetings that are coming up this fall. So these are regional networking and professional development events. We look forward to seeing you. And last but not least, here are ways in which you can call MANRRS and want to work with us, then let us know. Job postings, professional member networking, development training, diversity events. We look forward to working with you and your organization.
All right.
Is there another slide maybe? Okay, perfect. And last but not least, sorry, here's the survey code for you all to, if you could just take an opportunity and scan it with your phone. It's going to take you about 5 minutes or less to complete. We look forward to receiving that feedback. And with that, we'll have this screen kind of stay here for a second. Thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your evening. See you next month. Thank you, panelists.
All right. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all so much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.